around here.
Okay.
So if you move a little bit too far in front, it's not going to get you. And Ronnie will let you know.
Oh, no, I just heard this. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we're going?
Yeah.
All right. So again, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Rebecca Graves, and I'm the education librarian from down at the Health Sciences Library. And this is...
I'm Janice Dysart. I'm the science librarian that's based in this library here.
Okay, so we're going to be covering how you can maximize your impact by having a distinct identifier, or what they call a PID, a personal ID identifier, and also some other tools to help you make you and your work more discoverable. We only have an hour, so we're not going to cover everything, but we'll try to get in as much as we can. You should have a handout if you're here in the class. You should have a handout, two-sided, that's got some URLs on it and names. So those are the sites that we're going to be looking at. And for those of you online, you should have that should be posted, so you can get access to that there as well. So this is for you to take notes on, so you don't have to be screened. And then also, if you get involved in one of the sites and you're like, where are they? You can look at the handout, because we're going to take it in that order. So how many of you have an ORCID number? Okay. How many of you have heard of ORCID numbers? Okay, and how many of you have not? Okay, yay. So those of you who have heard of it, bear with me while I explain what ORCID is. So some people call it ORCID. Actually, you call it ORCID, but I was not doing that because I always misspell it then, because it's ORCID, as it is on the handout. And that is a collaboration that started back in 2012 with various publishers, foundations, and academic institutions to try to come up with a way to disambiguate names. So I don't know if any of you have run into problems trying to either find your own work or a colleague's work based on names. I'm seeing heads nod. So there's a lot of different naming conventions around the world, whether you put the family name first or the family name last. How do you change that if and when you get married or for children? Some places they only have one name. So there's a lot of issues around names. And then when do we change our names if we get married, or if we if we move to another country and we add additional names? So there's a lot of ambiguity around that, as well as other people with similar names. Like John, I have a colleague named Tim Roberts, so pretty common name. So it can be hard to hunt people down. So the idea is to solve that by having an ID, and it's becoming more popular. So I'm pulling up on the screen Springer Nature, that publisher, and they're actually started using ORCID numbers and requiring it for people who publish with them. So you can check that out. Here's what it looks like in PlusOne. So you may or may not be familiar with this publisher, with this journal, but this is an open access journal. And I'm gonna go with the conservation conflicts and select that article. And if I click on the first author's name, you see they have an ORCID number. And when I click on that number, it actually links me to their ORCID ID record, or their ORCID record. And so this is the idea behind the ID numbers, is that everybody would get their own number. It disambiguates, or it reduces the confusion and conflict between trying to find somebody and trying to find their name. It gives you a site where you can have your education listed, you can have your employment, you can list your funding, and then you can list the works that you've done. And then this can be shared with publishers, it can be on websites, it can be on other sites. So we have joined in with this push movement initiative, that's a good word for it, to help out with the ORCID. And so we're going to take a little bit of time right now. So if you don't have an ORCID number and you would like one, you can sign up for it. So you just need to go to the URL on the website. So you can log into the computer in front of you if you haven't, or you can do this at home or on your laptop in your office. So if you go to ORCID without the H.org, and then you can follow their information on how to, where it says register, you can click on register now. I mean, we're not forcing you to do this. If you're like, oh, I'm not ready to do this, you don't have to. Again, the benefits is that you can track your research, you can claim it as your own, and you can also help other people find you. The other piece too is that if you work with groups of people, like if you manage a lab, or if you're in a lab and you want your mentor to follow you, if they have your ORCID number, they can follow you no matter how often you change institutions, if you change your name, if you kind of change fields, because sometimes people, move into other fields. So that way you can also make it easy for your colleagues to find you as well. And you can make it's easier for mentors to track their mentees. So I'll give a couple of moments to sign in. It's pretty easy. When you sign in, you can add, it'll ask you what you want to add. You can come back later and you can edit and add as well. So you can put as much in as you want now and you can come back later. And then you can also search for people in here. I'm going to bring up Sergey Kopykin. Is that how you say his name?
However you want to pronounce it.
Okay. I should contact him and say, Sergey, how do you pronounce your name?
Say Kopykin.
Yeah. I should ask somebody who
He's
speaks.
a physics professor on campus.
And so another example of a record, and you can see that the record will list other ID numbers. And we're going to be talking about the researcher ID today and the Scopus ID. We're not going to be talking about the loop profile. That one's actually out of the Frontiers Media. They focus on open access scientific journals. So if you publish with them, you can have an ID with them. So you can have all the IDs. So any questions on ORCID? I'm going to tie it up here just by saying that it is an international initiative. And it's not tied, for example, we'll find out Scopus is tied to Scopus, Loop is tied, with the Frontier Publishing. The ORCID ID is actually agnostic as far as where you're publishing and what your discipline is. So I think it's a little more universal of an ID. And it's also, well, I guess I'll stop there. That it's more universal, so it's not tied to any one platform or program. So I think that's one of its benefits.
I mean, some universities have required all their researchers to get an ORCID. So far, MU has not done that. I think they've talked a little about it, but they have not taken that step. So if you have one, you'll just be a step ahead when they come out and say, we want you to have it.
So if there's no questions on that, I'm going to actually move on and let Janice take over. Unless, did you have anything to add to ORC?
Any questions about?
So as far as visibility, how does that help one's visibility?
Well, certainly it keeps you distinct, so people don't get your research mixed up with everybody else's name that's similar to yours. More and more publishers are using it, and more, I think people are going to start looking at your account online to get information about you. So it's sort of a growing movement. So if you get in now, you're sort of getting in on the lower level, and I think it's come a long way in just 6 years. So,
has anybody who has an ORCID number used it, found it? I mean, other than maintaining your record, has anybody found it beneficial? Found it helped them track somebody else?
In terms of beneficial, I would say that a lot of systems that do automated metrics and author measurement type things, having an ORCID associated with your works helps the accuracy of those also.
Did you?
I was curious if that automatically syncs your work. Like when you're submitting an article and you link it to your ORCID, will it automatically appear on your profile when that article is accepted and published? Or do you have to enter everything manually into the profile?
Can
you repeat the question?
Okay. So I'll repeat the question was, if you have an ORCID ID, does it automatically refresh and capture the work that you do? And my understanding is you have to go in and have it look for you, and then you can check and see what's yours. And some of it you might have to manually put in, because I have to double check again where it's looking for the information.
I'll show you in a minute how to upload stuff quickly into it. I think, though I haven't verified this, I think if you're working with a publisher who requires you to have an ORCID, that they'll load the information into the system.
And I did have one faculty member tell me that she requires all her graduate students working in her lab to get an ORCID number, and she uses that to actually follow their process. Now, if you don't have a lab and you're not following researchers, that's not necessarily going to be a benefit. That's not going to be a benefit for you. And to build on what Steve said about finding information about faculty, I know we have done author searches for campus for different departments to see what have faculty published, and it can be really hard to do author name searches because of all the different ways the names can be listed, and and even if you are consistent, the publisher or your colleagues might not post it on the article the same way. And so to have an identifier number really does help. And so just to point it out again on the +1, on that, so here's one with the author. So if you look, you could search by the author, but then you could also double check by going to the ORCID website and checking it. So it's not perfect, but it does help cut down on some of the confusion.
And I'm assuming it follows you. So for a grad student who is today here and leaves for another institution tomorrow, you can keep the same ID, am I right?
Yeah, you keep it for life.
Okay.
Okay, so the question was assuming that the number the ORCID ID follows you, and yes, it does. So if we go back to Sergey's, you can come in here and you can edit it, and so he or she would go in and edit, what the email is attached to it, what university is attached to it, and you can go on, and if you add in education, you can put that on there. Here's the employment. So you just add that to your profile. But you do have to add it. So it's not a magical assistant that's going to do all your work for you, sadly. Okay.
Okay, we just talked about an ID that you have to basically set up yourself and do some maintenance on it. I'm going to talk briefly about another one that's automatically created for you. It's done through the Scopus database. How many people are familiar with Scopus? How many people? A few of you. Scopus is one of our big databases that covers really all disciplines, and they index about 23,000 journals. So they index a lot of journals. They don't index all journals. They have certain standards, and the journals have to meet a certain set of criteria in order to be included in Scopus. But they do cover a lot in all different subject areas. So we'll go just into our databases on our library webpage and go to Scopus. And we'll just go right into Scopus. And it defaults into the topic search, but we want to go into the author search. That's a little slow. Okay. And we'll just use our same person here. And this is telling you he's used multiple different versions of his name. He's published 82 articles. He's currently affiliated with the University of Missouri. And these are sort of his subject areas. if you click on his name, you will see basically a profile that Scopus has created for him. And it takes a minute since he's written, according to Scopus, he's written 82 articles. Now it's possible he's written more, but they have not been in journals that Scopus covers. But they'll give you information about him. And notice he's got his ORCID ID right up here. And if he wanted to add references to his account, he would just click on this add to ORCID right down here. And there's a little wizard that kind of takes you step by step how to add articles that are in Scopus into your ORCID account. You get an author account in Scopus once you've written 2 articles that are indexed by Scopus. If you've only got 1 article, they're not going to create a profile for you. You've got to have 2. Now you do want to, once you've got a profile in here, you've published enough and you've got, a little profile, you'll want to check periodically, say, once a year, and just look at the articles, which are down here, that Scopus has assigned to your name. Scopus does a very good job of figuring out who's associated with what. Certainly if you have your ORCID, that makes it easier for them. But they do occasionally make mistakes. And if they do, you can come back up here. And right under this graph, there's request author detail corrections. And this can be changing your affiliation or adding an article that's not on here, as long as the article is in a journal that Scopus covers. Or it can be taking articles away from your profile that you didn't write. And again, it just takes you step by step through the process. So this system, I think, works pretty well. You don't really have to do too much for it.
I am going to jump in. It is good to double check if you have publications. It is good to go in and double check and make sure that all of yours are in your Scopus record, that they found them all, or that they haven't given you somebody else's. So.
Right. Which does happen most often when you've got a really common last name. I think particularly if you have some kind of Asian name, they tend to maybe get it mixed up a little more. But I've watched this through the years, and they are getting better and better at getting the right stuff in your profile. And while we're in Scopus, looking at his profile, notice up here in the upper right, it says HIndex 21. Does anybody know what the HIndex is? Has anybody heard of the HIndex? Yes.
Well, it's a ratio of like articles citation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could basically say that. It's basically, he said it was a ratio of journal articles and citations by this particular person. And that's basically what it is. It was a metric that was created not all that long ago by a Spanish physician, a physics professor whose last name is Hirsch. I think it's Jorge Hirsch. So that's why it's called H factor. He decided, or HIndex, excuse me. He wanted to sort of get his name in there. So he chose HIndex. And so what this 21 is saying is that Dr. Kopikin has written 21 articles that have been cited 21 times. Now, as you can see, he's written more articles. He's written, according to Scopus, 82. But he has 21 of those have been cited 21 or more times. And this is easy to compute yourself once you have some articles. And we should have mentioned this at the beginning, but we didn't. We have kind of a guide on this kind of information. And if you go to the library site under Services for, we've got Researcher Support. And we've got all sorts of research guides on here. But the one we want is under measuring and maximizing impact. We're under researcher IDs. And here's our guide. We're going to talk about a few more IDs in just a minute. But under HIndex, I've got a little example here. If you, what you want to do, once you've published a few articles, you just put them in a spreadsheet and you sort them by time cited. And you can get time cited counts from Scopus, from Web of Science, Google Scholar is another place. And you can put those in, and then you just start counting down from the top. So the most cited article is number 1. In this case, number 2 has been cited 15 times. And you just keep counting down until the article number is greater than the number of times it's been cited. And then you go back one step, and this is your HIndex. So this fictitious researcher's HIndex is 6, meaning they've published 6 articles have been cited at least six or more times. And you can see that they could easily move their HIndex could rise as they publish more articles and as more of their articles get cited. And with HIndex, you can't compare, it's sort of, you have to look at it, it's relative to other researchers that have been in the same field that you are in about the same amount of time. Because you can't, if you're just starting in a field, you can't compare your HIndex to somebody who's been doing research for 20 years. Because your HIndex can never be higher than the number of articles that you have published. So you may have published 2 articles that have been cited hundreds of times, but your HIndex is only going to be 2. So your only control over your HIndex is publish more articles. And then as you get more published and people start citing you, then it'll go up. But as I said, it's relative. You can't, you know, if somebody asks what it is, you can say what it is, but then you need to look, they need to look in the field and see, look at similar people in the field with your research and see what their HIndex is to figure out, do you have a good HIndex, not so good, average?
And I'm just going to jump in and add about field, because in some disciplines, they publish more in books. And this is looking at journal articles. So maybe somebody has an HIndex of 3 in that field, which a scientist, like somebody in plant biology might, or physics might say, well, a 3, that's really low. But you might say, well, in our field, we're doing books. So actually a 3 might be really high in your field. So just to say, it is discipline or field specific.
And I won't say it actually has to be just papers. I mean, it could be books. You could count. But I admit it, the HIndex is probably used more in social sciences than sciences. It's not really used in the humanities, but then cited references aren't used as much in humanities as they are in other disciplines. So, okay, let's see. Since we're still in Scopus, we'll do one other thing in Scopus. We've kind of talked about the number of times articles have been cited and HIndex, and there's a lot of new metrics coming out on people's research, and they're kind of put under this one descriptor called Altmetrics. So people heard about that, Altmetrics. It really stands for alternative metrics. And by alternative metrics, they really mean like how many times has your article been viewed, maybe how many times it's been tweeted, mentioned in social media, mentioned in the news. It's sort of all the different uses of the article besides just the traditional, somebody cited your article in their research. So it's sort of a growing area. Altmetrics hasn't really, I don't even think it's 10 years old. But Scopus has a component of that, and I'll show you that. We'll look at one of the articles for Dr. Kopikin. And this is just a full display for the reference for his article. And notice here on the right, Scopus has this metrics box. And the first metric is, of course, how many times it's been cited. But if you come down a little further, there's this little colorful icon here with different spokes. And this is measuring alternative metrics. And one of the companies that does this is called PlusOne Metrics. I have no idea where they came up with that name, but PlusOne, they're one of the big companies in this area. The other company in this area is called Altmetrics. And I think Altmetrics must have been the first company in the field because they sort of got the name. But Scopus, actually, Scopus is, the database is owned by the big publisher Elsevier, and Elsevier has bought the PlusOne Metrics company, and that's why they stick this in here. But if you click on this graphic, it will come, you'll get a display, and it'll sort of break down what is done here. And notice the colors. In this case, this article's had a lot of abstract views in the EBSCO databases, which are, actually the library subscribes to a lot of EBSCO databases. EBSCO is a company that provides a lot of, it's an ebook platform, it's databases for finding journal articles, it's a mixture of things. So that's why this green spoke is the biggest, because it's got the most action. Then there's Mendeley. Mendeley is a bibliographic manager like EndNote and Zotero. And 4 people apparently have downloaded this article to their Mendeley account. Then there's mentions on Facebook. And that's about it for this particular article in PlusOne. Now, an easier way to get to the PlusOne stuff is to just go to the main library page and use the Discover at MU, this big box right here. And I'm just going to type in a topic that I know has a lot of altmetrics associated with it. We're going to do Twitter and protests. Oops, if I can spell. And you have to wait a couple seconds, but you'll notice, you'll see the little PlusOne icons start to display. They won't display next to all articles, but to quite a few. And you can see, you know, by the little colored graphic how much action there is. And this very first one, which actually happens to be, whoops, up here, which happens to be a book, has got a whole lot of action. And if we click on this, this happens to be books, so there's a little bit different information for this. And the one thing that I find a particular, might be a particular meaning to the author is that under usage there's holdings. And what this means is how many libraries have bought this book. And there's over 1,000 libraries that have purchased this book. So we've got readers, we got reviews.
Goodreads. I didn't realize it did Goodreads.
Yeah, it does Goodreads and Amazon. I mean, these companies do a little bit of everything. Altmetrics does a lot more with the news sources, which I always find interesting. If you publish an article, sometimes it's nice to look and see what news sources have picked up your research and are reporting on it. It's interesting. And whether these altmetrics, whether they really amount to anything, it's a little early to tell. I think for now, they're really of interest. They're a lot of interest to the author because you don't have to wait to see how your article is cited because that takes a while for somebody to read your research and then write their paper and then publish their paper. With Altmetrics, you can start getting reactions or downloads or reading, libraries buying your book, you know, almost immediately. So you can sort of kind of track what's going on with your research. And whether, you know, I'd say if you have something that's really stellar, like, you know, having a lot of libraries buy your book, it might be something you want to highlight in, you know, a job application or when you're going up for promotion or tenure. You probably won't get altmetrics in all your items, but if you have something that really shines, you know, why not highlight it? And I'll show you one more. Publishers are starting to get into doing this. I think we lost.
I think we did.
PlusOne is one. Actually, let's do this. PlusOne is one publisher that's doing this quite a bit. And I'm just going to pull up, this is an article that came out, I think last year, which was pretty
Yeah, it was
interesting.
last year. I saw that and I was sad. It's not good
Insects are
news.
declining by quite a bit. But looking at this article in PlusOne, this is a journal site, you'll see they're summarizing a lot of usage information right here. They have a little metrics tab that you can click on, and you can get a lot of information. Of course, what stands out on this article is that it's been viewed over 500,000 times, which I think it's pretty impressive. More and more publishers are doing things like this. They may not be quite like PlusOne. They may feature the data right on the website next to the article. I know with Elsevier, if you write an article that's published in the Elsevier journal, they give you access to what they call an author dashboard, and you can sign into your dashboard and you can see what's going on with your article. So I'd say basically for now, it's just something to be aware of. I'll talk a lot more about this topic in a workshop in November. I think it's November 9th. Because there are a lot more places to look for Altmetrics, and it's just a growing, I'd say growing area of interest. Any questions so far? If not, I'll let Rebecca talk about another profile.
Okay, so we've talked about two different, the ORCID number and then Scopus number, but you can also have a Google Scholar profile. And how many, does anybody have a Google Scholar profile? Okay, some people do. Others are shaking their heads no, that they don't. So if I go to scholar.google.com, so the Google Scholar profile doesn't at this point talk to the ORCID number, which makes me sad, but I have no control over that. But it's free. So if you have an affinity with Google Scholar, especially if you already have a Gmail account, it's easy to set up. So if I looked at my, well, actually, let me pull up our guy, Sergey. So once you have a profile signed up, and if somebody searches on your name in Google Scholar, your profile should show. As long as you have a choice of making it public or private. So if you've made it private, it should not show up. And if you've made it public, it should. And you also have to use a valid university email. I think if you use your Gmail account, it won't necessarily show. But if I pull up his account, you can see it's similar. You get to have a photo with this one. You can post where you are, your fields. You can see the cited by and the citations. And you can see that his numbers are slightly different here than they were in Scopus. He's got a higher H-index here. Here it's 34. Scopus, it was 21. And part of that is what the two different databases index and how they track the references. So that would be another piece for following your own data, is noting where you're getting the information from. So if you say my H-index is X per, my H-index is 12 per Scopus, or my H-index is 12 per Google Scholar, just to give the folks that are looking at that number some context. Because if you say it's 12 and I look in Scopus and it's actually 10 or 9, I'm going to say, well, are you inflating it? Because they're not quite the same. They also do show, they slice it a couple of different ways, like the index, and only like all years or only since the last 5. So you can look by that. And then they also list co-authors and the texts. So you can set one of these accounts up. So you need to log into your Google account, and you can find, I have to look down, I always forget where to look for. So if you click on my profile, you would sign in and then create an account. And it'll ask you to fill out the different areas, like for your name and your email, and to verify that. If you want to upload a photo, and then you can do searches within Google Scholar. They'll say search, to find all your papers. And you can pull in your papers that way. Yes.
I have two questions. One is there any general consensus as to whether an HIndex or Scholar is more or less reliable than Scopus or other location? Or does it depend on the discipline or field?
My personal opinion is that the Scopus one's cleaner, but I don't have any data to back that up. Janice, do you have any?
No, I mean, it's sort of the same thing. Scopus is more controlled environment. The citations are coming from journals that meet a certain criteria, so they are respected journals. And in Google Scholar, you just don't know where it's coming from. There are what we call predatory journals out there, which we've done a session on that too, which is kind of publishers that are just trying to get your money, and they'll put up anything. It's not even refereed. And you don't want to do that because you're basically tying up good research with a journal that doesn't count. So I would say probably for promotion tenure, they're going to look at something like Scopus or Web of Science, because those are the databases that have very controlled journal lists. But it's fun to look at Google Scholar. And actually Google Scholar, I mean, not all of the stuff that Google Scholar covers is bad, because they're also doing things that maybe Scopus and Web of Science aren't doing as good a job on, like covering a lot more conference proceedings and
thesis and dissertation.
Yeah.
Which
That's
Scopus
another.
does not include.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the comment was that Google Scholar includes theses and dissertations that Scopus doesn't include. So if you were getting citations on those, that wouldn't count in your Scopus HIndex, but it would count in your Google Scholar one. So part of it would be your department and your discipline, whether they feel that Google Scholar is good enough. Part of it might be the discipline saying, yeah, we want Google Scholar because they cast a broader net and we're willing to have it, maybe not be quite as clean data, we'll take it.
And Google Scholar does a much better job with books. Scopus and Web of Science, they say they index books, and they do, but it's a very small group of books. And I think it's mainly books that have basically been edited that have articles. It's not like an entire book on a topic, which would be more what you might have in humanities and social sciences. So with books, I definitely go to Google Scholar for citation counts.
And so I guess the take home there would be not to diss Google Scholar, but just to label it, just to say my HIndex is X according to Google Scholar or Scopus. So one of the benefits of a Google Scholar profile, if we go back here, is that when you log in and you create it, if anybody's doing that now, it'll pull in and say, these are articles written by people with similar names to yours. Are these yours? So you can just check them and pull them in pretty conveniently. And then later you can go in and update it by doing the searches. So you don't have to manually type in everything. I mean, there might be some things you don't have, but you don't have to manually type it in. And they actually do have instructions if you have things that are not in Google Scholar, how you can add them to Google Scholar. We don't really have time to go into how to do all those steps, but if you have questions on that, you can contact us or look in the Google Scholar help, and they'll tell you how you can set it up. Or if you look underneath my own profile, it'll walk you through the steps of how do you get things into Google Scholar that aren't there, and how you submit that, because it's not hard, but it's, I don't know, like 15 steps and stuff. So, so that's another way to get your name out there. So if your name is, if you're getting published, if you've gotten some documents out there, this is a good way for folks to find you, because a lot of people do search Google Scholar because it's a decent search engine, and it searches full text. So a lot of people use it when they're looking for things that are specific. So if you have a profile on there, you can set it up. And again, this profile can follow you. So if you change institutions or change your email, they don't post your email, but it's connected to your account. You can go in and update your record and have it current. So one of the pieces is some of these accounts are created for you, like the Scopus ID, but other ones like the Google profile, the Google Scholar, and the ORCID ID, you have to create. And there's a lot of other ones. There's like the Loop one. There's ResearchGate. There's all sorts of different ones. So you have to stop and think, which ones, how many am I going to do? How many do I have time to get, and which ones are going to give me the most return on investment? And so I would definitely say Google Scholar, because Google Scholar is so ubiquitous, would be a good one. And also the ORCID ID. And unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to turn it on to Janice for another one.
I mean, and she mentioned other IDs, and I'm just going to briefly say something about a few of those because you've probably heard of them. One is Researcher ID, and Researcher ID, which sounds great. It is sort of a companion to Web of Science. Are people familiar with Web of Science? Web of Science is a big database like Scopus, covers all disciplines, major research journals. And they have created, they're sort of a companion. They've kind of taken Research ID is sort of their author profile system. But the trouble with Researcher ID is that you totally have to create everything yourself. And let's go ahead and look up our guy again. We picked him because he's gotten into everything. Not all researchers have done as much as he has as far as getting his name out there. But we were searching his account in Researcher ID. And if you're in Web of Science, you can click on a link to Researcher ID and get it. And you can pull in articles from Web of Science into Researcher ID. But here's his account. And if you look at it, you'll notice kind of affiliation and all that kind of information up at the top. It's got his ORCID ID in here. But if you come down here and look at his publications, it looks like he did this one time 5 years ago and never went back and updated his stuff. And I think that's Researcher ID. I just, personally, when I've looked up people in here, I just don't find that many people in here. So I really don't think it's worth spending your time on because people just aren't using it that much. Two others that you might hear, you've probably heard about is ResearchGate and academia.edu. Both of these are commercial sites, even though academia.edu, that's their name, that's not their web address. So they're not affiliated with any educational institution. These are social networking sites. And I think in the case of humanities, they do like academia.edu. And it's really a personal decision whether these are beneficial to you, to have a profile on there and to communicate with other researchers in your area. If they're using the system, it may be worth, setting up your profile in those. I know ResearchGate in particular has gotten in trouble with publishers because ResearchGate has strongly encouraged their members to post all their articles, and the members don't realize that even though they wrote the article, they don't necessarily have the copyright permission to post the article freely on the web. And within the past year, the publishers have, I think, threatened lawsuits, and ResearchGate has basically pulled down all the articles that they didn't really have permission to display that people have written. Yes.
So if you post one of your publications on ResearchGate and people access it through ResearchGate, does it count for like your view index on all the other indices?
He's asking if you post things on ResearchGate, if it really counts. And I would say Not really, no. It's more the social networking aspect. I mean, it's possible if you post it on ResearchGate, people read your article and then they use it in their research and they'll cite it, in which case you'll get more citations. So there's a positive benefit there. And there's a positive benefit if, you know, you're interacting with other people on that platform and that works. You just have to be sure what you're posting, that you have the copyright permission to do that.
And I think, like, if you take a PDF of an article from a publisher site, that's one download. But then if you have that PDF and keep handing that PDF out, that's not being counted on the publisher site.
Yeah.
Again, so.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Okay, I think we're ready for institutional repositories.
Yeah. I was actually going to mix up the order a smidge because Janice had just mentioned, I know I'm springing this on Janice and I've been springing this on everybody, but she mentioned about permission to publish and permission to upload. One of the things we talk, it's at the end of the sheet. It's so actually if you flip it over, it's Romeo Sherpa. And I don't know, has anybody heard of Romeo Sherpa? It's pretty obscure. Well, it shouldn't be obscure, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it fits. I can't type and talk. You can either just Google Romeo Sherpa or you can type in that URL. What this does is you can look quickly by publishers and see what they allow for you to do. So for example, if I pull up forest, I think it's forestry. I have to check my notes here. Yeah, so forestry. So if I look at forestry, it comes up with the journal Forestry, and it's called a green journal. And you're like, well, what does that mean? And if you scroll down, they have a color chart down at the bottom of the screen. And it means you can archive preprint and post-print or publisher's version of PDF. So it gives you like what you can't archive the publisher's one, but you can post it. So fine line between that. So that could be one if you wanted to post your articles on the different profile sites. Some other journals real quick, American Sociological Review. Ooh, and I spelled that right. That one's a yellow journal, so you can see what that allows. And do they have any restrictions like embargoes? You know, and you can come down and see that. And then the last example that I'm going to throw at this is the New England Journal of Medicine. And this one, you see the red X's all the way down. And so this is a white journal, which doesn't support any archiving. So, you know, it's like, don't get your hand slapped if you post it, if they catch you, I suppose. So this might be a site that you find useful, that you can post your journals in, or you can throw journals at to see, well, what do they allow? There's a sister site to this. If I click on the title in the upper left, you see that they have Sherpa Juliet. So if you're looking at research, if you're looking at getting research funding, you can look here and you can search what the funder's open access policies are. Like, do you need to make your data public? Do you need to archive a version of your article somewhere? So I'm not going to go search in here, but you could easily go in here and, you know, search on your, you know, select Sherpa Juliet, and then you could put in the funding agency you're looking at, and you can see what they require you to do as far as open access on your data and your publications resulting from their funding. Okay, and so I flipped that order a little bit just because now I'm going to talk about repositories and posting your information, like where do you put it? So, you know, say you've been writing and publishing and you have some documents you want to put up, where do you save that to? There are lots of repositories. Again, I can't type and talk. So here's one list out of the National Institutes of Health, the National Networks of Libraries of Medicine, and what did I miss? Probably repositories. Okay, so here they have a list of different repositories that you can use. And one of the ones I am going to talk about is Figshare. But you can see there's many. We have, MOspace is DSpace, right? We have an institutional one that's based on DSpace, and I'll talk about ours, the MOspace one. But you can see there's a lot of other ones. And so, again, this goes back to the whole discipline specific. So depending on your discipline, you might have a repository that you need to put your information into. Plus, the PLUS organization, PLOS, that does PlusOne journal that we showed, they also have a list of repositories. So if you did PLOS, recommended repositories, you'd come up with a list there. So if you're looking for that. So I'm going to go to MOspace, which is MOspace.um system, because this is for all 4 universities. Not just MU. And this is perfect if you, especially if you're starting out and you have given a paper, shared a poster at a conference, and you want a place to store that and make it public, you can upload it here. So if you go to MOspace and you click on Submit Works in the upper right, you'll see how you can take the steps to do that. So as long as you're currently affiliated with MU, or any of the other universities in the system, you're allowed to submit files, and it'll walk you through what file types you can do and use and how you can set it up. And then there's a license form, which is a Creative Commons. I was blanking on that, so it's an open, pretty much in your favor. And you can submit your information and you can make it private. You can have timeframes on it. So you can submit it now, but not have it open to the public until like 6 months from now, etc. And this is a great way to put information in here. I'm going to search on, you can search the entire database, or you can search it by communities, which is by campus or departments. You can also search by author, you can search by title, so you've got a lot of options. I searched the Missouri Hunger Atlas for my example, and you can see there's several different years. And if I click on it, pulls up the record for it, gives me the authors. I can see here's the link to the PDF, so I can download it. There's a permanent URL or URI handle. So again, if you have information that you want to put in your portfolio, on your website, and your profiles, you can store information in these depositories and have it accessible for others. And these are discoverable because Google Scholar crawls these. So if you're searching in Google Scholar, your information should come up. There's also a library in Germany that's created a database called BASE that crawls these different databases. And I'm pretty sure nobody around here has heard of the BASE database, but I think it might be a little more used over in Europe. And I actually tried a couple of our faculty who I knew had our information in MOspace, and it came up when I searched on it in that database. So again, especially if you're working with any students, or if you're a graduate student yourself or an undergraduate and you've published something or presented at a conference, please put your information in here, because we're happy to have it. You can have your dissertation and theses in here. So again, it's discoverable and people can find it, and it should be tracked and counted. I'm gonna look real quickly at Figshare.
One more thing about MOspace. We are tracking usage.
Oh, that's right.
So you can get some usage data from MOspace.
I
So
forgot.
basically Altmetrics.
Yeah, so if I go down to the bottom and it says statistical information, it's loading statistics. But you can see statistics, and you can look by country, by authors. It'll show you how many times it's been looked at, downloaded. It'll show you where the views had come from by country. So it's taken some time, and I'll let that run, and I'm going to go to Figshare. Figshare is a commercial site, but they are free for researchers, so they make their money by going to the institutions and partnering with them. So if you're not affiliated with a university such as MU, you can use a repository such as Figshare. And again, you can search in here. I'm going to search on monkeys and math, because it comes up with some information on basic math and monkeys and college students, which I thought was interesting. And you see that you can look at the collection or the data set. So again, pretty similar. This one, Janice showed the Plum metrics, and she mentioned Altmetrics. This is that company, so they have a donut or a circle as opposed to the spokes.
Yeah, and again, they have color. The color represents different aspects of the metrics, so it's the same principle, just slightly different graphic.
And you can see, as Janice mentioned, this one has news. So this got quoted it has 6 news outlets. It's blog, tweeted, video, Mendeley.
And if you click on that link, you can actually go to the actual tweets, the actual news articles, things like that. So you can see as much or as little as you want to.
It's kind of funny.
And what the numbers really mean in the circle, I mean, I don't think.
Oh,
too many
they
people-
weighted. Yeah, so you'd have to read about the score. I was just laughing at that time. All right, so we still have a couple other things to go, so I'm not going to go much in depth. I mean, it's pretty easy to search these different depositories, and it's fairly easy to submit to them too, if you have data. So the big question is, like, where are you going to store your data, or your papers and your proceedings and such? So again, you're here at MU, you have access to MOspace. It's free to you, and it'll stay there forever, even once you leave. That URL is yours, and the data is yours. We don't kick it out or clean out that repository after you graduate or after you take a job somewhere else. So take a look at some of those to find out where you want or need to store your data, and you can kind of combine that with Romeo Sherpa and what data you actually need to post and what you can post, according to the agreements you signed with the publishers. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Janice.
Okay, so we'll do journal impact factors in 2 minutes. Have people heard of journal impact factors? Most people have. Journal impact factors is a way to rank journals. There's lots of different ways to rank journals. So far, journal impact factors are the ones that everybody seems to latch onto, and that's the rating system that they tend to use, at least on college and university campuses. Certainly there's been criticism about the system, but so far no other system has kind of risen up to take its place. Journals, there's a set of journals that are covered by Web of Science Core, which are assigned impact factors. So not all journals get impact factors. They have to reach a certain meet certain criteria in order for them to be assigned an impact factor. And if you're trying to find a place to publish, certainly it's nice if you can get it into a journal that has a high impact factor. Impact factors are basically telling you how often articles on the average are cited in a particular journal over the last couple of years. And let's just real quickly, we're going to let's go back to the library webpage, and under databases, we'll go to something called Journal Citation Reports, because this is the resource that provides the journal impact factors. Though normally publishers, if they have journal impact factors assigned to their journals, they will put that information on their website because they consider it, you know, a selling point, a sign of prestige to have an impact factor for a journal. So if you just want to look up the impact factor of a particular journal, you can probably go to the website and get it. And let's just do a journal real quick. Well, let's just do, Rebecca mentioned New England Journal of Medicine, so we'll just do that one. So this one's rather,
That should be high.
did I spell it wrong? Oh.
Oh, it might be NE. Might be the abbreviation in here.
Oh,
There it
I
is.
forgot. In this index, you can't just type it in and search. You have to pick it off the drop-down menu. So it's a little quirky. And if the journal you're typing in isn't listed in the drop-down menu, it doesn't have an impact factor. Okay, New England Journal of Medicine, and they issue new impact factors every year. In 2017, this journal has an impact factor of 79.258, which is very, very high.
I'm laughing because most of them I think are under 10. I haven't checked it in
Yeah.
a while, but most of them are around between like 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. So this one is an outlier. It's like one of those that blows all the curves and stuff.
And impact factors vary by field, just like HIndexes.
Try forestry.
Because, you know, it depends on how much people cite each other's work in a particular field. If you're in like medicine,
Type in forestry. Do that
forestry,
journal.
okay.
See what that is.
Let's go back to,
Do they have it?
there it is. Okay, forestry. Oops, okay, here's the journal. Yep, here it is, impact factor 2.638.
And that's a good journal in that field.
And by itself, the impact factor doesn't really mean much unless it's up in, you know, 50 and above, it really means something. But if you look at all years, you can see how it's changed through the years, but what you really want to look at is down here at the bottom, something called rank. Because what it does is it tells you this journal, which didn't have that big of an impact factor, is ranked 9 out of 66 titles in the subject area of forestry. So it's a very highly ranked journal in the field of forestry. But as you can see, it's not cited all that much, and that's just because of the nature of the field. So everything is relative.
Yep.
That's the bottom line. Everything is relative. And, well, we've run out of time now. This is kind of just a quick little thing on journal rankings, but in our guide, we've got more information. I list more rankings, like Scopus, which is a competitor to Web of Science. They've come out with their own journal ranking system. I think it's called CiteScore, and it's really just like Journal Impact Factor, except they base their data on 3 years instead of 2 years. And they actually cover a lot more journals than Web of Science. So it'll be interesting to see. They really just introduced CiteScore about a year ago. So it'll be interesting to see if people start to latch onto CiteScore because it covers more journals in like the humanities and the social sciences than Web of Science's journal impact factors do. It's an ever-moving area, and you just sort of have to sort of keep track of things, be aware of what's going on. So any questions you can think of? You can always contact either of us later. We've got our contact information on the handout, and we're on the website, and we're happy to answer questions down the road when you actually start getting into some of this stuff and working on stuff.
All right. Well, thank you for your time and your attendance, and have a good day.
And have a great weekend.
Yeah.